In music, a tonic is a crucial part of a chord. It is the middle note that helps anchor down the highs and lows and creates a harmony. Here at the Tonic Accord, our goal is to be the tonic note in the political arena. We want to bring the right and left together for a discussion. A country needs a moderate and sensible center to bring the outer extremes together. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Tonic Accord. I'm Alex Kapitko. Drew is out of the office this weekend on a little holiday, so that means you guys are stuck with me. Lucky you guys. There are just too many important events going on right now, so I decided it was still a good idea to do a brief little housekeeping episode. I could probably fill a 3-hour time slot talking about the plethora of international and domestic events, but I think we'll save that for once Drew's back. So today I just wanted to focus on 3 specific topics. The first one is the 4th 2020 presidential debate, which was last week, and it was definitely interesting. The second one I'd like to fill people in on is the escalating issue between the Spanish government and Catalonia. To me, this is a big issue that doesn't get talked about enough, and this breakdown of relations between the Spanish government and an autonomous region may be a microcosm of the breakdown of the nation-state. The final issue I'd like to talk about is Brexit and the new revelations this week. Because in less than 2 weeks from now, the United Kingdom is set to leave the EU. Will it be a hard exit? Will it be a soft Brexit? Will a deal be reached? Let's see. But for now, let's dive into it. So the first issue I'd like to discuss is the Democratic Party's 4th presidential debate. It was held on Tuesday, October 15th in Westerville, Ohio. And this debate was noteworthy because it lasted 3 hours. It also had more candidates than the September debate with 12. I feel like usually as you get closer to the presidential election, the candidates drop, but this year that does not seem to be the case, as 2 more were on stage. This debate had a very interesting setup as Biden and Warren shared center stage, surrounded on left and right by their fellow candidates. To the left of them were Tulsi Gabbard, Tom Steyer, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders. And to the right of them were Pete Buttigieg, Andrew Yang, Beto O'Rourke, Amy Klobuchar, and Julian Castro. And my first takeaway from this debate is that it took a different direction from the 3 previous ones. For the first time, we saw the candidates focus their attacks more on Elizabeth Warren and less on Joe Biden. I don't know about you guys, but in the previous 3 debates, it seemed like Joe Biden was constantly in defense. It was always him defending his legacy, his record, and his time as vice president. And it must be hard doing that. So it was actually kind of refreshing to see the attacks not going towards him and towards Elizabeth Warren. I think it may be too early to call Warren the front runner, but she definitely seems to be somewhat of a co-front runner with Joe Biden. And I think this could be good for Biden if he can sit back and let her take the heat. But at the same time, if he doesn't get a lot of talking time and she's able to dominate the cycle and bring up good policy points, I think this could be the end of Joe Biden. Another big takeaway I took from this is that in the previous debates, it seemed like the progressives, such as Sanders, Warren, and Harris, were always on the offensive. They were constantly attacking the moderates, such as Biden and Klobuchar. They always were attacking people like Biden's belief that Medicare for all should be Medicare for those who want it, keeping the private option. Biden was also harsher on border control. And for the first time in this debate, it seemed like the moderates came out ready to fight. And for this reason, this 4th debate to me seemed like it had more substance and more discussion. And I think it also highlighted the growing differences between the progressives and the moderates. When making my list on who I thought were the winners and losers of the debate, I found myself somewhat torn up on Elizabeth Warren because part of me thinks she was the biggest loser of the debate, but also part of me thinks she might have been the biggest winner as well. She's complicated to me because she seems like a truly authentic person, and I think that's why she has been so popular. She speaks her mind, she has a strong policy-based approach, and she really seems to truly care. And I think that's why in this week's debate, she lost some ground. She's a person that's always been very upfront about her policies and agenda. And I think she had a lot of issues when the moderates, such as Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg, asked her on numerous occasions to answer one simple question. And it was, how much will the middle class have to pay for her Medicare for All bill? And the problem is that she bounced around this question numerous times, And I think it's because she doesn't want to become a soundbite for the right or for Donald Trump. It's really complicated, because everyone knows the costs on the middle class will go up. It's bad for Warren because Bernie has already said so. He's been very honest about the fact that the middle class is going to have to pay more. But I also can sympathize with Warren because if she openly says this, being potentially the front runner, she's going to be a soundbite for the right, and it's going to really hurt her going forward. And I think this will backfire on her in the long run because she has always been an authentic candidate. And if she isn't open about this, some people may just presume she's another politician. I think that if Elizabeth Warren wants to own this and come out on top, her argument should be that, yes, taxes will go up for the middle class, but the overall cost of healthcare will decrease. I'm not someone who's totally persuaded on this argument. I think research still needs to be done because there are always going to be people that are left out and maybe can't afford this. But it's a worthwhile talking point, and I think she should stick with it. As for other winners, I think tonight was a win for the non-Biden moderates who want to try and be a suitable alternative to Warren and Sanders. Probably the two biggest people talked about were Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar. To me, Pete Buttigieg was someone in the middle. At times he seemed too degrading, too aggressive, but then at other times he was powerful and to the point. I think Pete Buttigieg's problem is that he's struggling with what he wants to be. Part of him is a middle America Democrat, but then also part of him is trying to be a woke progressive. And I think until he figures out what he's doing, it's going to be difficult for him to really make progress. But then Amy Klobuchar, to me, was really the powerful one in this debate. She was on the offensive, and she was not only on it, but she was good at it. And this was a nice change to me. And I think it added some freshness to the moderate side, because to me the moderates have just been with their backs against the wall fighting this progressive wing. And tonight, I felt like for the first time I could relate with mainstream candidates. I think her strong point was when Warren was discussing her stance on the wealth tax, and Klobuchar expressed her discontent with Warren's more progressive plan. She mentioned that no one on this stage, no matter what you're saying, supports helping billionaires, not even Tom Steyer, who is the only billionaire. The crowd laughed. And then she's like, directly to Warren, in quotes, "Your idea is not the only idea." And I think this was a strong point, and it helped highlight to Americans that there is an alternative to the further left agenda and the progressive agenda. Unfortunately, there were, in my opinion, more losers than winners. To me, Kamala Harris may be one of the biggest losers. She has been so up and down during this debate cycle, and she constantly seems to change directions every debate. She seems to be putting in too much effort with not too much in return. She tries too hard and often comes off quite unlikable. To me, her worst part was when Warren was discussing the need to break up large tech companies like Facebook. She was absolutely correct on this point, and it's an issue that does definitely need to be addressed. The issue is that Kamala Harris tried to equate Warren not being outspoken about banning Trump on Twitter to Warren's push for breaking up social media firms. To me, it just seemed like a far-stretched approach and kind of a desperate attack. And let's be honest, is that it's an issue that needs to be addressed, and Trump, either way, if you block him from Twitter or not, is still going to have a voice. And I feel like blocking him on Twitter is just going to give him more of an argument that there is a bias. Elizabeth Warren responded very well by basically saying, we can talk about blocking Trump on Twitter, but I'm more worried about beating him in 2020. And that to me just describes very well the stark difference between these two candidates. Another candidate that I think was a loser in this fourth debate was Tulsi Gabbard. I've always been a fan of her because I think she appeals to this kind of isolationist part of the left that could kind of be a mirror image of the libertarians on the right. But tonight it kind of backfired when basically she was talking about leaving Syria and the current issues there. And she basically said that the issues were not going to be solved by us staying there and that it was all a factor of our failed regime change in Syria. And she was blatantly then called out by Buttigieg, who was like, that is just wrong. And he had good reason to say so because arguably the Syrian crisis has nothing to do with regime change. As for another big loser, like always, I feel like Beto didn't do that well in this. He will always have his group of people on the left that seem to like him, but I would say this was not a good debate for him. His gun buyback program seemed to kind of falter again. It just seems under-researched and difficult to carry out. During the night, Beto said that if Americans didn't willingly turn in AR rifles and other weapons of war, in quotes, he would have to use law enforcement to figure out another solution. And so it was basically a nice way of him saying that we're going to do a gun buyback program, but if you don't do this, then we're probably going to come for your guns. And I think a lot of Americans are for tighter gun control, but this plan just seems very aggressive and most likely will scare away a lot of moderates and conservatives that maybe are sick of Trump. So to me, Beto just kind of seems awkward and unprepared and kind of like the guy that's there, but everyone's kind of like, come on, man. The last person I think I'd probably put in this group of losers would be Joe Biden. He didn't have a terribly bad night, but I just think there's a big accumulation of things that are not going to be helpful for him going forward. Between these talks about his son's involvement in Ukraine, even though there's no big issue with it, I don't think legally, it still is not good publicity for him. And then he kind of just was in the background in this debate. He had a few good points when he talked about how his age is actually his plus because he has so much experience. But in general, I think unfortunately we're starting to see Joe Biden get passed by. If you notice, this was the first debate where he was not the center of attention. It kind of seems like the candidates are less focused on him and kind of more on the actual prize. If you've noticed, they've turned the discussion on each other. So, it was an interesting debate, and I think we've seen a bigger growth in the moderates, which for myself I think is good news because if this party wants to beat Trump, that's kind of the direction they need to go. For the second issue now, I'd like to take our attention away from the United States and over to Spain. Right now, there is a continuing crisis between the Catalonian region and the central Spanish government in Madrid. This is not a new issue, but it's an issue that is very divisive, controversial, and even amongst a family, there can be very different reactions and opinions on it. I am currently living and working in Madrid, so I've had the privilege of talking to people on both sides of this issue. And I've been to Barcelona and have seen some of the protests which happened in 2017. The BBC says this is the country's biggest political crisis since democracy was restored in 1975. Democracy was restored after the death of the military dictator General Francisco Franco. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because Catalonia's independence movement is back in the headlines. Because just last week, Spain's Supreme Court jailed 9 separatist leaders. This prompted days of increasingly violent protests in Barcelona. And all of this happened because it is related to the events back in October of 2017. This is when the crisis flared when a banned independence referendum by the Catalonian government was met with a heavy police crackdown. I want to make it clear off the bat, though, that this referendum in 2017 was not just some spawn-of-the-moment movement by Catalonians. There's a lot of historical context that has kind of led to where we're at today. And for people that don't know, Catalonia is in the northeast of Spain. It borders the Mediterranean Sea, and it's one of Spain's wealthiest and most productive regions. It also has a very distinct history that dates back almost 1,000 years. So this is a history that dates back before Spain even existed as a unified nation. But so now, before the Spanish Civil War, Catalonia enjoyed very broad autonomy, but this was suppressed when General Franco took power. But now when Franco died, the region was granted autonomy again under the 1978 Constitution, and they prospered economically and financially under this democratic Spain. Then now, in 2006, a statute granted even greater powers to Catalonia's financial system, and this is when they began describing themselves as a nation. And I think this is an important part of their history because instead of thinking themselves as a state or an autonomous region of Spain, they started seeing themselves as their own nation. This escalated even more now in 2014 when the Catalonian government held a symbolic referendum. It was of course outlawed by Spain, but this caused a growth in separatism inside the region. And in 2015, the separatist government actually won the regional election and took power. So now for the first time, you had a separatist government leading Catalonia. This was now the big lead up to the full referendum that happened now on October 1st of 2017. This, of course, was also declared illegal by Spain's constitutional court. But the interesting thing is that turnout was only 43% amid a boycott by unionists. And apparently law enforcement officials were sent to Barcelona to deter people from actually going out to cast a vote. But then things got even more interesting on October 27th, when the Catalan Parliament declared independence. This is probably what really escalated things past no return, because Madrid, using the Article 155 for emergency powers, then dissolved the Catalonian Parliament, sacked its leaders, and called a snap election for the 21st of September. Charles Puigdemont, the then Catalonian president, fled abroad to Brussels with several other leaders. Those who remained were either arrested or charged with treason. And then on the 21st of December, the separatists won a very slim majority, and the following May, Catalonia's parliament swore in Quim Torra as their new president. Madrid had blocked other candidates, so this was a controversial vote, though the separatists did still remain in power. And so I think the key thing is that now for the last year and a half to 2 years, this issue has been simmering. It never went away. And I think a lot of people were really disturbed by seeing the Spanish National Police going down the streets of Barcelona, beating voters and protesters, and jailing politicians. And I think this brings up disturbing and dark memories of the Franco dictatorship. And to a lot of people, seeing the police marching down the streets of Barcelona in 2017 was a very anti-democratic vision. Of course, all the context wasn't there. A lot of reports say these videos were put out as pro-independence propaganda, and some of these protesters were egging on the police to get beat up. And so I really can't clarify that much more, but it does seem like there was foul play on both sides, and it's just an ugly issue, to be completely honest. And so now this little summary brings us to where we're at right now. This October, Spain's Supreme Court has finally sentenced 9 of the arrested Catalan leaders. And this is what sparked this new wave of protests in Catalonia, and actually in Madrid as well. There have been leftist protests in support of Catalonia as well. One of the more controversial prison sentences was a 13-year prison sentence for sedition and misuse of public funds, which is handed to the former vice president of the Catalonian government. The other 8 received sentences of between 9 and 12 years. And to be completely honest, this is a big controversial issue because up to 13 years for this vote in this referendum, which a lot of Catalonians believed was the right thing to do, is very controversial. And we're just going to have to keep watching it as things hopefully don't escalate too much more. In general, though, I think both sides are culpable in this issue and eventually are going to need to talk. They haven't been talking, and it's kind of just been pointing fingers, and it's been a lot of historical anger. I think it's very unlikely that Catalonia could leave Spain and gain national recognition. Regions barely have success in leaving another country. The last example I could think of was Kosovo, and it was a large humanitarian crisis for Europe that we're still seeing issues and remnants of today. And even so, many countries would still refuse to think of Catalonia as being independent. Financial institutions would leave Catalonia, and it would probably spark a lot of unrest in different ways. I think, though, the bigger thing that needs to be addressed right now is that the European Union in Brussels needs to make up their mind on where they stand with this issue. Puigdemont, the former Catalonian president, has been staying in Brussels and is being protected from Spanish prosecution. To me, what does this say about the EU's stance on this? What does it say about the EU protecting Spanish law? And if the European Union doesn't support Catalan independence, why are they protecting one of the figureheads of it? To me, it just doesn't make any sense. And they can't say that they believe in the laws and rights of one of their member states if they are protecting a man who, like it or not, is considered to be a traitor. I think Puigdemont needs to be allowed back into Spain, and I think discussion is more important than prosecuting him. Now, on the other hand, I think the central government in Spain needs to start talking and working with Catalonia. It's something that has not been very productive recently. And one of the big issues is that many center-right and right parties in Spain, such as Ciudadanos and PP, seem to have a very staunch and divisive view on Catalonia and seem to only want to force it to remain, but they don't want dialogue. Groups like Vox on the far right have a very almost combative view against Catalonia, and this is not productive and it's not going to help. After Franco's death, Spain was able to work together to leave the past atrocities behind in order to form a stable country and a democracy and move forward. And I think once again, the Spanish government and the kingdom need to take this into account. During times of mass terrorist attacks in many parts of Spain, the Spanish government was able to finally sit down and broker peace between the Basque terrorist group ETA and the central government. Talks like these have happened, and the Spanish government has been able to lift a hand and make it happen. And I think right now would be a crucial time to do this once again. The people I've spoken to on both sides of this issue seem to think that this issue is unique to Spain. They feel that this issue isn't happening elsewhere. The Catalonia issue is unique. But the thing is, it's not. Throughout Europe, there are issues like this. Almost every European country is comprised of states that have a history that was there long before the creation of a nation and will likely be there long after it. These countries need to balance national unity with allowing regional pride. Without it, they will have a lot of issues going forward. The European Union cannot last if the countries in it cannot even keep their nations together. Catalonian independence would be bad not only for Catalonia, but for all of Spain. I think it would cause a spiraling popularity for independence amongst other regions, such as the Basque Country. This would just start a larger crisis in Spain, and actually, ironically, would probably cause a larger crackdown on rights inside the country. Okay, so before I'm out of here today, I just want to briefly touch on Brexit. MSNBC reports that, despite being billed as Super Saturday, a special parliamentary session in the House of Commons offered little detail on when or even if Britain will finally exit the European Union. Now, this is big stuff, guys, because Boris Johnson has pretty much spent his entire prime ministership discussing no more setbacks on leaving the EU. He has pretty much said no matter what, on October 31st, the UK will leave. So this is a big blow to his rhetoric and his vision of how this needs to go forward. According to Bloomberg, Parliament voted for Boris Johnson to request further delay. This was after a day of high tension in the House of Commons in London. This is a blow to Boris Johnson because he has said, deal or no deal, they will not negotiate delay. Now, all this came about on Saturday after lawmakers voted 322 to 306 in favor of an amendment. This amendment was by former Tory minister Oliver Letwin, and it requires Johnson to write a letter by 11 p.m. requesting an extension until January 31st of 2020. Letwin said the amendment provides insurance against crashing out without an agreement on October 31st. So I read that one of the positives of this move to postpone the Brexit vote could actually lead to more moderate lawmakers voting for a better deal down the road. Now, we'll see how this goes as time continues because Johnson has been very adamant about leaving as soon as possible. And so this is big news, and we're going to have to follow this and see what happens. Now, Boris Johnson has already spoken out against this new amendment. He said, in quotes, "I wish the House to know I'm not daunted or dismayed by this particular result. I will tell our friends and colleagues in the EU exactly what I've told everyone in the last 88 days, that further delay would be bad for this country, bad for the European Union, and bad for democracy." End quotes. And to be quite frank, at this point, I don't see any positives for them extending this vote and this leave any longer. I think that the politicians and the Brexit campaign have made this bed, and now it's time for them to have to sleep in it. So I think a fair question now is what's next? What is going to happen between now and October 31st? The European Parliament's Brexit coordinator said the body's Brexit steering group will consider the result of the Commons vote on Monday. Whatever happens next, the marches outside the Parliament show just how important a close EU-UK relationship must be, he said on Twitter. And I think this is an interesting point because it's been such a divisive couple of years in talks, but it does highlight how important this relationship needs to be. At the same time, there are also plans for the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. This is the legislation needed to leave under the New Deal. This will be debated on Tuesday. And together they raised the possibility of 2 votes on the Brexit deal on consecutive days. The Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, said he would seek clarity on the government's plans. And by Monday, Johnson should have requested an extension from Brussels. This is in accordance with the requirements of this Ben Act. So I think in the next couple days, a lot of revelations are going to come out. And a lot of people are worried that even though Johnson is mandated to request this extension, the question is, will he do it, or will someone else do it for him? Now, there are also a few other scenarios that could play out in the next couple weeks and months. There's always the chance that EU leaders won't accept the extension, but this seems unlikely because the economic ramifications of this would be horrendous on both sides of the English Channel. Some also say that Brussels could also offer a technical extension of a few weeks. This would be in the hope that Johnson may have more time to reach a better deal. Then there's also the option, which I think is a bit ridiculous, that they could also push it out until June of 2020, when the next cycle of the EU budget begins. Now, I find this option very unlikely, mainly because there is a big Brexit fatigue that is covering most of Europe right now, and I think a lot of people just want this done. Now, there is public support in the United Kingdom for having a second referendum, and I'm kind of torn on this. I think opening up the idea of a second referendum would be good in theory, because I think a lot of English people have learned more about the ramifications in the last couple years and maybe wouldn't support another leave vote. But the issue I have is that I'm worried that a second referendum would just cause political chaos inside the UK. Holding another referendum would seem to discredit the people that voted to leave, and it would tell them that their first vote didn't count. Brexit may be built on a lie, but I think holding a second vote would seem somewhat anti-democratic, like it or not. So at this point, I think it is just time for them to pull off the Band-Aid and move forward. They can still have relations with the European Union, and I think they need to try to stay as close to them as possible. Now, I do want to end this on a somewhat light and positive note, and Capital Economics called Saturday's vote a decent result for the economy and the pound. This is because it makes a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October even less likely. Analysts at Deutsche Bank said the outlook for a Brexit resolution remains constructive. So you know what? Maybe the talks this week will align the conversation in a different way going forward. I'm finding it very unlikely that the United Kingdom will leave the EU on the 31st of October. I think they will be saved this Halloween scare, but I still don't think they're out of the woods yet. And so we're going to have to follow this and keep everyone up to date with what's happening. So lastly, I just want to thank everyone for listening on this Sunday. We'll be back next week with Drew and a lot of topics to discuss. Like always, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, our website, the Tonic Accord, YouTube, Podbean, and Apple Podcasts. Please give us your feedback. Let us know what you like. Let us know how we can get better. And tell your friends and spread the word. Thanks, and have a great week, guys.